God, a Savior who never changes. He never fails. He never weakens. Even when things seem like they're awful and the world's falling apart, He stays the same. The Word of God says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So next week, He's going to be the same. Next year, He's going to be the same. No matter what happens in the United States, Jesus will never change. He will never lose one little bit of His power. He's as strong as He was before the creation of the universe. Yes. And He's strong. He will be that strong until the end of this world as we know it. He will never fail. He will give Him praise. That's what we're here for, people. Yeah. Yes. We're not here for us. We're not here for you. We're not here for me or David or this worship team. We're here to worship God. Yes. The God of the universe. He created every little thing. He created you, and I know sometimes we just think we're so wonderful, and we are wonderful. We're made in God's image. Do you know that? You're made in God's image. He made you with His own hands. I could preach for a minute. I do want to encourage you. I know it's summer. Man, we've had people on vacation. We haven't had ours yet. Ours is coming in a couple of months. But listen, I want to encourage you, seriously, to be here next week. Because I've been dealing with this subject for several weeks now. We haven't talked a whole lot about what's going on in our country and, you know, what the courts are doing and what the government's doing. And I know some of you have asked me, and we've had a few small discussions here and there. But I'm going to address it next week. From a scriptural standpoint, what Jesus has to say about how we respond to the things going on in our country. And so I want to encourage you to be here and invite somebody. Excuse me. Invite someone that normally would not come to church, possibly that has a negative opinion of church. You should have plenty of people that you can invite in those criteria. Right? So invite them. Just say, listen, this one time, I'll never ask you again. Come to church with me. Take them out to lunch afterwards, okay? Sweeten the pot a little bit. Come on. Won't it be worth $15, $20 to get them to church? Come on. But bring them next week. You will not regret it. God is doing some amazing things here, and I love, Gerald shared about what you're going to find out about part of what your giving goes to. I love this church that some of you know, some of you don't know, most of you know, that this church double tithes on what we take in. We don't just give 10%, we give 20% to missions, locally and around the world. I don't know of another church that does that. I'll be honest, I know of no church that does that. Now, there may be some. I just don't know of any. So I applaud you. I congratulate you. I ask God's blessings on you for how you give. And so, with that being said, we are blessed this morning to have Mike and Sue Stevens here from Costa Rica. As our missionaries, part of one of our missionary teams that we support. They're supported by many other churches and people. But we are blessed to have them here today. So Mike and Sue, if you guys would come on up, we're going to turn this over to them to kind of share what's going on in their lives. Would you give them a hand?
What do I do? Oh, I did it. Okay. I'm going to talk first and show you some slides, and then Mike is going to share for about 5 minutes. But I wanted to tell you, for those of you who don't know me, some of you have known me since I was a heathen. And when I moved down here to live with my sister and her family, with my 2 sons, got saved in this church. My children went to the Christian school that was connected to this church. My mother moved down here, and many of you know her as Miss Tommy, who was part of the worship team and did the children's choir. And my brother also moved down here, but he was not a part of this church. He works at the Pickens County Jail. Some of you may know Bob Olson. So anyway, our whole family migrated to Jasper from Illinois. Okay, so we've been in Costa Rica. We just finished our 3rd year. Before that, we were 7 years in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and 6 years in Quito, Ecuador. And before that, we spent 4 summers in Russia, and you guys have helped us with all of that. And so really what I'm showing you today is what you're doing in Costa Rica. So for those of you who are geographically challenged, like my sister, I put this slide up, and so you can see that Nicaragua borders us on the north and Panama on the south. We're right about in the middle where the big red dot is, and at San Jose where the capital is. So you can, this is the city we live in, and this is the official city seal. We live, it's on all of the trucks and buildings. It's Escazú, the city of witches, and is its motto, Ciudad de las Brujas, city of witches. So anyway, but we live in a neighborhood in Escazú, which is called the Heart of Jesus. So we live tucked under the Heart of Jesus in the city of witches. Isn't that a wonderful? And this, just so you can get a feel for how we live, this is our little house, and it's actually officially called the Little House. It has a title on the front of it, and it's very tiny and very lovely, surrounded by gardens. And, you know, we go to the markets and do all those things. As far as prices down there, a friend of mine compared it to the prices in California. So a little bit pricier than here. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It's the priciest country in Central America. And a lot of people, I actually had a waitress say to me once, "Oh, you're a missionary in Costa Rica? That must be really hard." And so, you know, but the reality is a lot of rainy season, a lot of buses. Our house is an hour and a half by 3 buses to our church, because I live near my job. I teach at an international school, and we live near the school, and we travel to our church. And then, okay, then we have a short movie. Mike's dad came to do a conference. He spent a month. Was there's sound? Sorry. So this is an advertisement for the church about his coming, that they're going to help us with discouragement. Special agent Pastor Sherman Stevens, father of many. You know that he's the oldest of 17 children, and genius in the Bible. So that's dad on the right. And when discouragement is knocking on your door, this teaching will protect you. Victorious Christian living, and it was wonderful having him there with us for a month, and here he is teaching in our church. And we did take a trip up to the volcanoes, so here we are in the chilly mountain air by one of the volcanoes, and here's a view down into the crater, and it's been actually really active this year. We've had a lot of ash fall. It's kind of like having sand in the air. So it just messes up your eyes. It's not wildly dangerous like it sounds. When at the beginning, I'm kind of going through the year chronologically, so right when we got back last year, we celebrated the second anniversary of our church, and the 4 people standing up next to Mike are 4 people who came to our very first service and have been faithful ever since, so that was exciting. And I wanted to introduce you to 2 men in the church who I think are so fascinating. Yule is on the left and Willie's on the right. Yule's from Costa Rica. His father was mafia. And so he grew up, can you imagine the thinking that you'd have to change growing up the son of a mafia person? And then Willie actually has a price on his head in Colombia, which is where he's from, because he didn't have enough money to pay off the money to FARC in Colombia to protect his little store. So they were a death sentence on him. And so he's he's a refugee from Colombia, and he's a delightful member of our church. Yule translates, and Willie's part of the worship team. He used to travel around Colombia doing salsa singing and stuff, so he's very good. And Mike made his annual trip back to Ecuador. Here he is with some of our precious indigenous family, and you can't really see, but the older woman is cooking over an open fire for him, which is how she does all of her cooking, and she's making him peas for that. She served him fresh cooked peas for dinner, and here he is. He always goes over Day of the Dead, and so this is with our indigenous family, and they're making Day of the Dead bread. And Day of the Dead, fascinating holiday. Some of you have heard about it before when we've been here, but they used to be, you're going to the cemetery to worship and have communion with your relatives, and now this is a lovely Christian family, and they're just, honoring the memory of their relatives, but they follow the traditions. So Day of the Dead bread, and then Mike added a fresh touch to Day of the Dead bread, and they made Day of the Dead pizza. So in the beehive oven, and then not going. There we go. And then he did a conference in the church that we had started up in Quito, that we had planted there. So we did a conference there in that little church, and it's always delightful to go back. And then he also did one in Guayaquil, but I don't have any pictures of that. And this is an old friend of ours, Andy Whalen. Andy is autistic. And he adores Mike because Mike is nice to him when lots of people are not nice to him. And so he came down and spent 3 months visiting the church. This is actually Andy backing out of the airport. He couldn't quite manage how to get out of the airport correctly. And and it was such a wonderful thing for our church because they accepted him with open arms. I mean, we're talking a culture where we hug and kiss everybody 3 times before we've left the church, and so. And Andy doesn't like to be touched, so he would back away and turn away, and yet they just accepted him so beautifully. He was a lovely part of the church while he was there. Snored a lot. Here's another one of the little...
Les dijo, id por todo el mundo y prediquen el evangelio a toda
Go
criatura.
into the whole world and evangelize. Go ahead. Which is a really exciting thing for us because that never happened, or seldom to never happened, in Ecuador. We evangelized a lot, and people received Christ, but they didn't end up actually coming to church. And it's very common that people come to church. We now have 4 evangelisms every week. Evangelized twice in the center of the city, once at the university, and once in a park where the Nicaraguans hang out. That's my husband's favorite evangelism. So here he is evangelizing with our Finnish missionary, Tea. And then here's a Christmas celebration, and I included this slide just because of the international nature of our church. And I don't know how it happens. God does these things. But the man on the right is from Korea, and then the people in the back are from Costa Rica. But the guy with the tall hair, he's from Brazil, and the gentleman next to him is from England, and we just tend to have this in our church. I looked around once, and we had about 12 or 13 different nationalities. And here's a couple who came down to visit, and they're standing in front of our church. Our church is in a home. 4 of the missionaries live there. and then we use what would be the living room dining area for the church. And I am showing visitors as a hint, kind of a thing. Okay, so nice cheap flights down there. Here we are at a ladies' meeting, a group of us praying afterwards. And we always do Team of the Week. We talk about this church. We pray for this church and other churches who support us and other missionary teams that are connected with us. And we have a lot of fellowship in our church, which is a delight. When we were in Guayaquil, everyone connected with us, but there wasn't as much connecting among one another in the church. We've asked you to pray for that in the past. And in this church, they're so wonderful. They support each other, they call each other, they help each other, and we can hardly get people out the door after church is over, which is a great problem to have. And I wanted to show you this. This is the only indigenous art form in Costa Rica, are these painted ox carts and whatever you call the things that connect, yokes, I guess, that connect the oxen together. And you see these just every once in a while on the street. It's kind of fun. That was another visitor who came down. And my last little movie that I show, oops, you have to go back one. And this will show you that we'll do anything to get people to come to Bible. Members of our missionary team are a normal team with talents that are not so common. Starting February 1st. So we have Bible college as a very important part of what we do. We want to train people. We have classes all during the week. We teach English and Mandarin to draw people in, because Lucy on our team is from China. She also happens to be a Chinese natural medicine doctor, so she takes care of us with acupuncture and stuff. But so here's a group receiving certificates from completing one of the courses that we offer. And here's another conference that we had with two pastors who came down, and we love getting the people together for intensified teaching over 3 or 4 days. And I saw that you guys are saving for a church van. Well, we needed a van too. I told you our home was an hour and a half away by 3 buses, and we wanted a van for a lot of different reasons. And our son took it upon himself to spearhead raising money, our son Travis. So he raised money, and several churches contributed as well, and now we have a church van, and we're so excited about that. Yeah. And thought I'd show you the gas prices. So this is 552 colones per liter, which works out to about $4 a gallon. So, and here's Andy. After his 3 months, he's getting ready to leave. After blessing the church, he wants to come back and be a full-time missionary. We love him half to death. We're wondering if we have enough time to take care of him, but but we'll see what happens. But this is our missionary team. Lucy on the left is from China, her husband Brent, Mike and myself, of course, and then Taya is an amazing missionary from Finland. And then we had some people come down from the States, and we took a mission trip to Panama. Yeah. And Panama is a city of huge contrasts. It's changed a lot. We were there about 16 years ago, I think, and now the skyline just goes on forever and ever because it's a center for offshore banking, and most of those buildings are banks from all around the world, and it just keeps going. You wouldn't believe it. And then So then we did evangelism in the streets, and here you can see Brent with a white hat. He's got people involved. He does Christian magic to evangelize. And the police actually came to stop us, and the people said, no, and the police went away. So anyway, we did that. And then in contrast with that beautiful skyline, you see all of the turkey vultures where we parked our vehicle. So really interesting place, very, yeah. But we also went to the Panama Canal, because how do you go to Panama City without going to visit the Panama Canal? It's fascinating. And then this is Mike, and we call them the puppies. They're these our church has mostly young men, which is an interesting demographic for a church. And these gentlemen are connected with, they just graduated from a drug rehab center, a Christian drug rehab center that we've connected with. And they are so on fire. I mean, they belt out the songs at the top of their lungs, and they just love God. They're so excited about Him. So Mike took a number of them to the beach, and that was really great. And then we start our cycling out at the end of our year. Our year goes from, like the end of July to the end of July. We run a different year than the rest of you. And so as our missionaries start to leave, Taya left first, and then Brent and Lucy, and then Mike and I, and then they start coming back. So, but I just wanted to share, we just had our missionary conference in Baltimore, and that's what this slide is. And the gentleman in the blue shirt is Pastor Juan from Quito, and the woman in front of him is his wife, Norma. They were the first people in our church, Mike's assistant pastor and his wife. We worked with them for those 6 years, and they've been trying to go to our mission conference in Baltimore for the last at least 15 years and haven't been able to get the U.S. visa to do it. And this year, and it was miraculous. They gathered all their papers and they took them in, and they just asked them a couple questions about family. And they said, yes, we have a new granddaughter. And they said, okay, you've got your visa. They said, but we have all these papers. And it was just God's timing, So they were able to go, and the three people in the middle are from their church, and they were also able to get visas and go. So that was delightful. And then here's our church saying hi. And so anyway, we just want to thank you for all that you do. And honey, I'll hand this over to you.
Thanks. Good job. Thank you, Susie. Good job, as always. And thanks for, again, always receiving us so warmly. We always feel welcome here, and we're grateful for your participation in our lives and in the lives of Central Americans. How many like a good challenge? I like challenges. Some people don't like them so much. I grew up in New England, so I'm used to dealing very directly, like just, not pulling any punches. So if I have your permission, I'd like to challenge you a little bit as we consider, and you don't have to turn there, I'll just talk briefly about some verses in Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 22, where Jesus invites two pairs of fishermen to follow him. He literally called Andrew and Peter by name. And we define a call as a personal invitation by name. And he invites all of us by name, And we could say a lot about a call, and it's a very exhaustive subject. But there is a universal call where God calls people into his family in a universal sense, in that he's not willing that any should perish. And when that call is effective, we call it an effective call when people actually respond. God has called someone by name. Gerald, I call you by name to enter my family. And Gerald says, yeah, I want to enter. I want to accept the free gift of salvation. And the call is effective. Then there's a call into ministry where Paul said, I was made a minister of the gospel. Woe unto me if I do not preach the gospel. And we are all called into ministry as well. And I love the call in 1 Corinthians 1:9, where God the Father calls us personally by name to enter into fellowship with his Son, Jesus Christ. Isn't that precious? Fellowship, intimacy, union, partnership. What an honor. And then this call in Matthew chapter 4, where Jesus calls the two sets of brothers to follow him in discipleship. Now, some people don't like to follow. Following is hard for our human nature. Some people might think we lack initiative if we're following instead of leading. They might think we're weak if we're following instead of leading. But to have to submit control of your life to another is what Jesus calls us unto. And it's my conviction that there's really only one who's worthy of following. And we know who that is, right? He calls us, and he calls us to follow, forsaking our personal desires, our personal dreams, our personal ambitions, and deciding to honor his desires and dreams and plans for our lives. But this is the part I like best. You know what those disciples had to do to follow Jesus? To heed the call and follow, they had to leave their nets. Now, what do nets represent to a fisherman? Security, finances, maybe reputation, self-esteem. For James and John, it meant the family business. And we all have our nets, things that are difficult for us to release, that we want to hang on to because they provide some sense of security for us. We feel good about ourselves when we have these nets in our hands. So this is the challenge. If Jesus is worthy of following, then the challenge to us is to leave anything. I would describe a net this way: anything that prohibits or inhibits or interferes with following Jesus. I'll repeat that. Don't you think that's worthy of repetition, Pastor Mark? Anything that inhibits, prohibits, or interferes with following Christ. So this is the challenge. Let's genuinely seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and heed the one voice that's worthy of listening to and following: Jesus Christ.